Welcome, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. My name is James. I'm the CMO here at CDL PowerSuite. We want to say thank you so much for joining our webinar. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your days to be with us here. Now, as most of you know or will learn today, behind the wheel is the most critical phase of CDL training. We all want to see our trainees succeed. We all want to see our instructors succeed. In order to do that, we need to give them the tools, the proper mindset to do so. Now, with that being said, Tim?
Again, as James said, welcome everyone. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day. We know how critical your time is when you're running a school or our schools. Your time is precious, and we hope to make this beneficial for you and as we get into this. One of the most important things to probably remember this, we get so tied up in the admin side, the classroom and compliance side, we sometimes forget 2/3 of our school and 2/3 of the impact we make on these future drivers is outside the classroom on the range and the road. So,
Okay. Never mind. Sorry, we were having some audio issues, but looks like it's fixed. Okay, we're good to go.
All right, so my audio is working?
I think we're good now. There we go.
Cool. All right. If some of you joined before, my background, retired from Swift Transportation in May of last year. 34 years with Swift. I ran all the training centers with Swift. Got an extensive background in the industry. I've been fortunate to visit a lot of locations, a lot of schools, and see a lot of the best practices. And I've been very fortunate that. Been very involved with CBTA. Been chair of the oversight committee for about 7 or 8 years, co-chair of the oversight committee now. Spent 8 years on the board of director with CBTA until I retired from Swift last May. Been in board of directors with PTDI. We graduated probably over 100,000 students at my time at Swift. We were very fortunate to come across Jason and this team early in their process as they were developing CDL PowerSuites. And that was a godsend for us and how we ran our campuses at 14 different campuses with CDL PowerSuite. So when I retired from Swift, Jason approached me and asked me if I might be interested in working with this team. And I was like, are you kidding me? For what this did for us at Swift, it was a design program that if we had unlimited resources at IT at Swift Transportation, we would have probably designed many years ago. It's the first system I ever seen designed specifically for what we do as far as training in the CDL realm of the world. So let's get into it a little bit. We're going to try to go over a few things. Definition of commentary-driven driving, the importance in CDL training. We're going to go over some of the key benefits for the students, impact on the instructor effectiveness, student communication framework, see, predict, and act. All these things we're going to continue to hit on. We'll go through on this, and as James said, we'll have questions later. Go over some of the challenges for the new drivers, program level impact, and implementation in the training programs. So we're going to cover all these programs as we go through. And please, if you have any questions, send them in the chat box. I don't know if I introduced Jonathan. Jonathan's another one of the team members here at CDL PowerSuites. If I mistakenly call him Johnny, that's the same person. His name says Jonathan on his thing, but everybody calls him Johnny. So commentary driving. This is probably one of the most impactful, detailed way to get the most out of your training time with the students. You know, it's one of the things that we have found is that when we implement the commentary driving and we ensure that all the staff's doing it, it's remarkable how much more quickly the students progress. Let's talk about some of the reasons why here in a few minutes. You know, it's a lot of people ask, well, what is commentary driving? commentary driving is just basically a method where the students verbalize what they see, make every little decision inside that truck is being communicated, and making everybody aware of what's going on. It's, and the thing is, we go through this and we go into it. It's important to realize, and you hear a lot of times, I hear instructors go, well, they're having problems with communicating this, that. It doesn't have to be perfect. I don't care if the student is calling a vehicle coming up on the left a pumpkin. It doesn't matter. The point is that they realize that they do have something on there. So it's going to turn this driving into a thinking process that builds awareness, judgment, and confidence. And I'll explain that a little bit deeper as we get into it. Why commentary matters in CDL training? It helps students think ahead of the process in real time, build safer learning habits. So the basic elements of the commentary driving, and there's a couple of things kind of keep in mind as we're talking about this. A lot of this, 99.5% of this, of what we're talking about today, is really driven toward the road portion. And there's some of this that actually can equate to what's happening on the range, but most of this is on the road. When you get a driver, potential new driver, and then you get an instructor on the truck in your training, and we're getting into the process of learning, and if we use commentary driving, what immediately happens, for an example, if the instructor is given directions and you get the student to report those directions, commands, or whatever we want to call it, and they acknowledge that, it does a couple of things. It puts that instructor at ease, puts the student at ease, because if the decision was wrong or what they were going to do was wrong, the instructor would have an opportunity to correct it. So not only does the instructor feel comfortable, but the student does as well, because they understand that they're communicating clearly with each other. So that kind of builds into all this with the commentary driving. You want to know that the student recognizes the hazard when they're going through there. It gives you an opportunity to bring that hazard to the student's attention if they don't see it, if they're not communicating that. It gets down to that point on the decision making. One thing I've always said, and we were licensed in a lot of states, and some states required us to have the braking system over on the passenger side where the instructor was at. I've always been a firm believer, if you ever have to use that brake, you lost control of your truck 3 or 4 blocks. You made some bad decisions for you to have to use that brake. If you use this commentary driving, get your people in line with it, ensure that it's taking place, you will actually control that truck and how it moves through the traffic and how the student learns with nothing more than communication back and forth between the student. And, some of that, we're getting that, fewer silent errors. If you're going up to an intersection and you tell the students to make a right-hand turn, immediately that student should start communicating to the instructor what the steps are to make this turn, indicating their intentions, turning the turn signal on that they're turning right, making sure they're positioning the trailer tandems no more than 3 feet away from the curb to make sure nothing gets between them and the curb, setting up the truck for the turn, and just continuously talking all the way through the steps of that turn. And if any of that's wrong, then the instructor has a huge opportunity to correct something before it happens. Almost every single time throughout the years I've seen an instructor get involved where a student hits something, they did not go through this process. They just came up, told the student to make a turn, and no talk about the setup, no talk how they were going to do in the turn, the traffic check, and watching the trailer tandems. All this communication was not there, and that's how you control your truck. Better retention, speaking actions out loud strengthens memory pathways. It's thing that you look in studies and everything, we retain about 10% of what we read, 20% of what we hear, 30% of what we see, 40% of what we hear and see. If we getting to the point where you're actually doing, hearing it, seeing it, you actually get to the point where the student retains almost 90% of that. So not only are they just making a process and learning when they're making this, they're communicating it, it's getting into their muscle memory and their brain, and they don't even realize this. Now, I know I'm caught some of these slides, I'm kind of slapping around. It kind of messed me up jumping back. So the instructor impact, it creates constant communication, exposes gaps in awareness, just as I said a second ago, corrects thinking, not just actions, promotes a calm learning environment. Now, how does it do that? It's kind of to this first point I said a few minutes ago. If I'm in the truck with James and I tell James that we're going to do something at this intersection, and James repeats that back to me and then starts immediately communicating, then I know that James heard what I said, understands the assignment as far as making that turn, and he's doing all the steps. He's lining them all out correctly. Well, now James feels more confident in what he's doing. I feel comfortable that James is going about the right way. And we're not going to get any little nasty surprises when we get up to that intersection. I mean, we're even talking about our commitment point, traffic checks during the turn. All this stuff is being communicated. It gets the student more at ease. It gets the instructor a lot calmer and operates in a more professional environment. Now, I've heard instructors come to me and they go, well, then, what if I get a student and they don't want to do the commentary driving? It's very simple. When you get to that point, then you ask questions. If I tell James we're going to go up and make a right-hand turn, and then I'm going to ask James, what's your first step? And James is going to tell me, and I'm going to ask him what the next step is. And then James is going to tell me again and go through that whole process. And I promise you, within one or two times behind the wheel, James is going to get tired of me asking questions. And then he's going to start volunteering this information and being proactive in it. Now, there sometimes on the first day or two when you get on the road, you will run into individuals that are just really struggling. They're not really set up for this. They're going to take a little longer. There is times that you as an instructor have got to realize what the ability of your people are and where they're at in the process. And sometimes it's just a lot easier to let that individual sit back and observe a little longer until they get a little more comfortable. And as all instructors should do, you should have a training route based on the skill level of your students. You might have to go to a little less challenging route for it. So look at that smiling face and them glasses looking at us. So what does good commentary sound like? I know I kind of went over some of this already, but it's exactly what you see. When you're going down the road, do they see the pedestrian walking on the sidewalk? Do they see a woman walking down the walk, with their kids? Do they see a car coming out of a driveway? Do they see what's happening in the intersection? Are they looking ahead? Interesting. I saw something on LinkedIn today that somebody put on there. They thought like every single school should do the Smith system. Well, guys, the Smith system is a very good system and they're very proud of it, but it's principle based. If you're using the Smith system, the National Safety Council system, or the Greater Coastal, or if you developed your own system, the most important thing, and this is kind of starting in the classroom, you got to get all of your people using that system. And again, I'm not advocating Smith, National Safety Council, Great Coastal, or if you do your own system. The important thing is that's part of your team culture. And you install that in the students in the classroom, you install that in the instructor training. And what that's going to do for you is going to get the language the same. So when they're, however you're teaching them to scan, how you're teaching them to look at the intersections, what are their expectation on coming up on a traffic light? When do they refer to that as a stale green light? What is the commitment point? All of these things, you guys as a team, as your instructors are all together, y'all need to determine what are we going to use as far as defensive driving and practices, and all be on the same page. Because I promise you, when you get a student, it's in the very beginning of their training. If I'm sitting there referring things on National Safety Council, James is using Smith's system, and then somebody else is coming up with something else, and they get on those trucks, it's going to confuse them and get their stress level up, so they're not actually paying attention. They're more worried about the terminology. And again, point I made a few minutes ago, it's not really important that the language is perfect. What you want to know is that they are seeing what's in their environment, that they're managing their speed, their space, and they're looking and paying attention. Are they anticipating what's going to happen? Or when the car's coming up, are they understanding that there's maybe a distracted driver in there? Or if they're scanning up far up enough that they see brake lights, they know to get off the fuel and cover the brake. Intersection scanning, this, I think this is probably the National Safety Council always having out, reducing speed, increased following, checking the mirrors, always have a plan. All this stuff is the backbone of commentary driving, and it's so important that your team uses the same terminology. It will go a long way to keep from confusing your students. I promise you. So, James, will we have any questions? I think we got like 23 questions at this point so far.
No, not that was just me chatting.
Oh,
if anyone wants to a question right now, we'll wait a couple seconds. Is it possible to get a copy of the slides? Yes, we'll have a link sent out to everyone's email. So everyone will get this video as well as a PDF checklist, the steps that I'm laying out.
So while we're waiting for questions, we'll kind of share some of the better training tools that I've seen as far as getting your team all on the same page. And when you're practicing the commentary driving and your terminologies and stuff, it is very effective. I've seen people get 5 or 6 instructors in a van and just go out and drive and practice and play roles in the van. You don't have to always do this in a truck, again, because what you're trying to do is get your terminology. You're trying to get the habit. And, you hear a lot of times instructors say, well, I'm just trying to get them comfortable. Well, one of the things that CDL PowerSuites, and this going down a little bit of rabbit hole, and this is where I have seen throughout my career, and I see other schools struggle with this. Instructors get out there, especially in the advent of automatic transmissions. I usually joke with my instructors, a blind drunk monkey on a bad day can teach a student on the road now with an automatic, and that's an exaggeration, but it's the point I'm trying to make. And where I'm going with this, a lot of times the instructors, because they're not struggling teaching the shifting and keeping control of the truck, they've kind of relaxed a little bit on automatic. And on CDL PowerSuites, the students are allowed to do 2 reviews of the instructor a day. And, one of the things I think is always a shame, because this is feedback from our customers and how we built these reviews. It's a shame that one of the canned messages when the student does the review is that the instructor was asleep. That's terrifying. But the point I'm really trying to make, when you're on the road, when we have students out on the range, we're really coaching, and we should be involved in it. And there's a kind of a form of commentary driving you could do on the range as well. If I see James is out struggling, backing, so it's so easy to just go up and tell James, turn the wheel this way, and then turn the wheel this way. It's what we used to call pattern backing. It's much more effective if I sit there and, James, what do you need the trailer to do? Which way do you need to turn the wheel? And get James to think through that problem. And they're going to remember that, because when the student backs into an exercise and all you did is tell them how to turn the wheel to get in that exercise, they're not going to remember anything. If you sit there, and I'm not talking about every single time they get behind the wheel, you're going to have to give them opportunities to practice and kind of get the feel of it. But every once in a while during the day, you need to sit there and make them talk and rationalize what they're doing. And it's kind of a form of a commentary driving while they're on the range. So that's probably the biggest practical aspect of it. And one other aspect, before we move on from the questions, I just want to kind of throw in here real quick. If you're still using manual transmissions, make sure you're doing a good shifting class before you take them out there, because if you have a student that can't even recognize where the pattern is and is struggling, I promise you they're not watching the space around them. They're not looking ahead. They're not worried about setting up. They're too worried about getting in a gear. So it's not going to make them perfect, but if you do a really good shifting class, make sure they're familiar with the pattern. It goes a long way for that first day on the range with the instructor. I mean, on the road with the instructor. It is so important. We've seen over the years a huge impact of that when we do a really good shifting class. And actually, you could even almost critique which instructor taught the class as to how well the students performed on the road. It's hugely important. Now, whether you use the 400 split, road speed to recovery, RPMs, I wouldn't even begin to fight that battle. I have seen so many places, we've had electronic engines since the late 80s, and everybody's still teaching the old mechanical engine shifting. And really, it's not worth that battle. The important thing is that however your instructors are going to teach, that make sure you're shifting classes like that. Because in reality, if they do go get in a manual transmission within 6 months, they're going to be floating the gears and shifting by ear anyway. So again, just that goes in a huge way, is making sure that these students are ready for shifting is going to help a lot on this commentary driving when you're on the road. And also that whatever you guys are using for a defensive driving, make sure they're very good at that and understand what's going to happen when they get on the road. They need to understand before they leave the classroom that your instructor is going to expect you to communicate what you're doing and how you plan on doing it. And so when they get in the truck with James Monday, they're not shocked. Man, you want me to talk? Look, and again, make them feel comfortable. Understand that it doesn't have to be perfect. The thing is that we just want to know that you recognize hazards and you're understanding and that you're planning ahead if you see something up our hill. I think I just covered over one that was critical for new drivers. It takes any adult 6 weeks to develop a skill. Most schools are not going to have these guys and ladies out here for 6 weeks. We have to work so hard at making sure that we are giving these guys, it's one thing we always had where I worked before. We always said, treat these students like a loved one. If somebody's paying $6,000, $7,000, they're not paying for quiet time or war stories while they're out on the road. There should never, when we're on the range with our students, we're coaching. We get in there and we interject a little bit, like I said, and ask them, make them think through the problems. We demonstrate for them. We show things to them, and we get them in the process of beginning to develop that skill on the backing range. When we get them on the road, in my 34 years, I truly believe this, everything from being a road instructor many years ago, when we get a student on the road, that is the one time in this whole training process we're teaching. We're not coaching. We're not we are teaching. Every single minute on that truck should be a teaching moment. When we get the students in here, they should be communicating. The instructor should be asking questions. Every once in a while, turn around and get the students behind you involved. What do we do right there? What could we have done better? Get it as nothing but a continuous learning environment in that truck the whole time. There should never, a dead time in the truck on the road should almost be like the sin on the radio when they call dead air. There should never be a time in that truck where you're just riding. Completely communicating all the time, skating up ahead. That helps in so many ways. So we know what CDL students struggle with, the size of the vehicle. They get in there and they back it up. It looks a mile long. Limited scanning. We've touched on that before. You got to get them scanning that 12, 15, 14 seconds ahead. And the problem is when you get a student, and we all know this, when they go from a POV into a commercial driver's license, is the expectation that they are going to be a professional driver at the end of this process, and when they go through the school, when they go to a carrier with a training program or somewhere else with a training program, at the end of all this, what we should have is a student who's got a professional mindset that they're going to be a professional driver. And it's so important that when we use this commentary driving and we instill this knowledge in these individuals, regardless of what happens to them, it's kind of like raising kids. They're going to always revert back to their foundation. They're going to use this stuff. And again, so it's so important that we don't waste time on the truck. We want to use this commentary driving so they're excellent at checking out the traffic behavior and get consistent with their decision making. You would not believe that once you get past the resistance the first couple of times behind the wheel, how much more confident and at ease that the student and the instructor are, and it just absolutely makes the environment so much better. Impact on the program quality. You will absolutely see students progress faster, and not only faster, but they will have a more of a knowledge base. They're going to be retaining so much more of this. It's almost like a lot of us have been to training classes and everything, and they tell you the next day you're going to come back in at the seminar and teach a class. And it's amazing how much more you learn when you know you're not going to be the student, but the teacher. This is almost like a two-way street for the student and the instructor. The expectation that the student consistently call out this and recognize the hazards and how they're going to do things is almost like they're teaching. And here's the cool thing about it too. When you get the other students in the truck, they're sitting in the back. Throughout all this commentary driving, you know what they're doing? They're hearing it. It's getting the subliminal muscle memory of their brain. They're hearing this. And observation is probably underrated in so many things. When there's actually training going on and there's communication going on the truck, it affects the back too. And it gets them more comfortable when it's their time behind the wheel. As we go into this, I guess we've been in it since February 22, all this entry level training. And all the schools have their own little TPR number. I can't imagine that once they get past all this low hanging fruit, that at some point in time, they're going to be looking at us in schools. I mean, as you go through these audits, and that's one of the cool things. You guys got these really good quality schools. Is I think we're going to stand out so much more than a lot of these little CDL mills where they're just getting a student a CDL and that's all they're doing. And look, I'm not degrading that. Getting a CDL is important, and that's what we all do to a certain degree. But we got to have more of a little foundation under that. And I'm not talking about going above and beyond, but just take advantage of that time on the road with your commentary driving. Make sure the student's learning, and you will be amazed at how much better your students are going to perform out there. And you know what? And then when your students go to work for carriers or other places, you're going to have a reputation. Because I guarantee you, promise, just like at Swift, believe it or not, we tracked the performance of schools as they came in. There are schools we wouldn't go to. But I promise you, if I'm a mentor and I get a student from one of your schools and that student gets in there and starts repeating back what I ask them to do, and I feel comfortable with them because they're scanning. I know they're aware of their environment and they're scanning ahead and they're always planning if this happens, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to be really impressed with that school. And you know what? And that student's retention and safety numbers are going to be so much better too once they leave you. This for all of us when we're in the school business, these students are our legacy, and for better or worse, they follow us. And I promise you, this commentary driving in this culture with your instructors and getting the most out of the students will go further than you would believe, because I know backing's hard. We all struggle with backing, but very seldom does backing lead to a serious accident. They're usually high frequency, low dollar amount. You produce a really well trained student, very proficient in the defensive driving, and that's how you get them proficient. They're constantly communicating while they're on the road. Get them where they're really aware of their environments and they know how to actually take that defensive driving class and implement it on the road. You're going to go far. I promise you. Yes, that quality will be recognized at a carrier or an employer. Integrating commentary into your BTW. And again, I'm bad. I skipped around. So standardize the instructor prompts. And this goes back to the beginning. I'm not advocating what defensive driving course you do, but make sure that's your standard. That is your core. Make sure your instructors understand the expectation that when you talk to a student, they're going to ask if commentary was done on the truck. The instructors are amazing. They're no different than the rest of us, but they will come up with 5,000 reasons not to do it. They'll come up with 5,000 reasons to pencil push paperwork instead of doing it when they should. And that's one of the things I always loved about CDL PowerSuites is that I could sit back as a administrator for 14 or 11 campuses and immediately see if somebody's pencil pushing or if they're actually teaching a curriculum like we wanted and the students are progressing and all that off just a real clear, very clear dashboard. So again, the CDL PowerSuite plug for the second. Clear student expectations. They don't need to they cannot hear the first time when they get on a truck that they're going to be expected to communicate. They need to be, when they're in the classroom, they need to really study. Again, kind of remember back if you're in a conference somewhere and somebody tells you got to teach class the next day, if you tell these students that while they're in class, their expectations are when they get on the truck that they use this defensive driving and they're going to talk and see about these hazards, how they scan and scanning intersections, space management, all this stuff. If they realize they're going to have to communicate that on the truck, they're going to actually study it. We all see this so many times. Once a student gets a permit, they don't care about anything we got to say in the classroom. All they want to do is get in the truck. That's all they want. So you're going to have to lay out something so they understand that when they get in the truck, here's the expectations. And, guys, get into the point. If you still got manual transmissions, make sure that they got some literature that they're shifting and if you're going to teach the 400 split or if you're going to do road speed to RPMs for recoveries or, you progress, whatever your culture is at that location, make sure that the students are ready for that when they get in the truck. Make sure your instructors are clear on that and are all talking in the same language so that if I go from Jonathan's truck to James' truck, I'm going to be expected to hear the same terminology. I'm not wanting a clone or a robot, but there's some core things in your culture that everybody's got to communicate the same. So how do you impact that? How do you make sure that happens? And I mentioned this a few minutes ago, and this is so hard. As I've traveled with CDL PowerSuites and as I was with CBTA, and I was a lead team auditor for PTDI many years ago, about 75% of the schools I go to, whoever the school director or administrator is, if you were to go out there and stand on the range for a week, you'd be lucky if you saw them. And it's not that they're a bad administrator or director. It's just that there's so much administrative stuff going on that is so hard to go out and find out what's going on with your range. And other things are being taught. And that's another thing that I'd love I could sit here on the East Coast and go all the way to Lewiston, Idaho and see exactly what's happening when, once we went to CDL PowerSuites. But you got to find a way to know what's going on out there. And the biggest impact you can have is this instructor coaching training. Again, you can do this in a van. You don't have to take a big truck out. You're not worried about your instructor driving a Class A vehicle. They can do that. but get them in a van, do drive drills. Jonathan, take James out there and do the commentary driving. And, and the other things is you're developing this the first day, and this should be the only time that you ever see an instructor behind the wheel, but on the first day, the instructor really needs to drive out and demonstrate all this, how to set up for turns, do the commentary driving, talking, even doing the shifting. If you're still doing manual transmissions, and we saw a huge impact of that, we would actually make the student talk through the shifting. If they're sitting here at this gear and someone add 400 RPMs, drop one gear, that you would not believe how much quicker they learn shifting when they were talking their way through it. Get your instructors out and just do little things of coaching, and as you're doing this, and this is life's hard lessons learned, you need to work really, really hard to catch your guys doing stuff right. Brag on them when you catch them doing things right. One of the other things, is consistent documentation tools. I promise you, if you've got something that, one of the things we've always heard about in quality management, you got your lead indicators and your lag indicators. So many schools, we use paper that is nothing but a lag indicator. These instructors all of a sudden, have perfect memories. At the end of the day, you're going to pencil push paperwork. If something happens, then you lose that paperwork. One of the things that we provide here is consistent documentation tools in real time. If you got somebody who's wanting to paper push stuff and just make stuff up, and, you hear a lot of times you hear instruct, well, that's getting in the way of training. No, it's not. That's an excuse. You're trying to bluff somebody that hasn't spent many years out on the range, that you sitting there telling a student how they're doing is going to interfere with you teaching the student, which is crazy. But you'll see instructors try to convince people that all the time. In a perfect world, and if your loved one's paying $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 to do to school, when I got out from behind the wheel and James is my instructor, he needs to be able to tell me what I did wrong and what I did well. And what I did well is probably more important. And you know what? Then I should be able to look at that in a constructive. And the cool thing about CDL PowerSuite, the student has a portal. James did an evaluation on me. Guess what? I can immediately see that in my portal. And, that is so important. One of the things that we lose with these students, and it's important with your instructors too, to catch them doing right. Instructors get so caught up telling them what they're doing wrong and don't take enough time documenting what they do right. And you would be amazed that once you communicate with these students and give them the respect, they're paying money to do this, or going to pay money. Communicate with them and make sure you got a system that does that. If you don't have a system that does that, we can absolutely help you with that. Communication's the core of what we do here. And it's, from the admin to the instructor to the student, communication and the focused culture. If you don't have a system, we can help you with that. If you do, make sure you're using it. Communication is key. It is so important. So I'm running my soup coolers. So the key takeaways is consistency more than anything else. Have your students prepared before they go out on the road. Make sure they know a defensive driving course and understand they're going to be expected to communicate those aspects of the defensive driving course. Have your instructors all on the same page. Make them understand that there should never be any dad time on the truck. There should always be talk of scanning ahead, looking up a hazard coming up on the left or the right, scanning intersections, scanning traffic lights, make sure you're not coming up on a stale green light. And if you are, what is your commitment point? And what I mean by that, at what point in time, if you're doing the speed limit, if that light turns yellow, where do you have to continue through, because you're committed. All this stuff keeps from bad things happening. Make sure that everybody the things that are not there's some aspects of turning that are defensive driving. You'll be surprised how many times I've gone out and seen people, they don't protect the curb. You could get an M1 Abrams tank between the curb and the tire. All these things. And I promise you, if you get your instructors involved at this, and you ever get a student go out there and run their trailer cannons over a traffic sign or a light pole, I promise you, you'll be able to trace it back that they weren't following this process, and they lost control of that truck 4 or 5 blocks before the turn because they were not controlling it with commentary driving and communication. So that makes things a lot easier for you, makes it a lot easier for the students. When you get the instructors all on the same page, and again, we're not looking for robots. We're looking for some key takeaway, key points and how we communicate what we want students to do, how we want to communicate that on the truck. I'm not trying to interfere with James's way of teaching. He can get in there, and if there's some things, nuances or how he approaches things, that's fine. But use the same language, and never, ever sit there and have dead time on the truck. It is never an instructor's job to take a student out there, to take Jonathan out on the road and get Jonathan comfortable. You're not trying to make Jonathan a wreck. You are trying to get you're not trying to get Jonathan comfortable. You're trying to get him confident. That's what you're trying to build, is confidence. If you get them out there and you teach them to be a steering wheel holder, and they go out there and make sloppy turns and just enough to get through the CDL test, you have really set that student up for a very challenging career in this world. I promise you. So, the biggest takeaway: consistency, communication, and one thing, and the one thing I have learned over all these years is consistency. If you're doing it the right way, will equal quality. And that's why it's so important, just throwing back this little 5% to the range where you can actually use this and get students to communicate. If you let students go out there and they practice backing and they just keep doing it the wrong way, they're going to get really good at doing it the wrong way. That's why it's so important. At some point in time, we slow down in this process, even at the range. More importantly, on the road, again, I feel like that's where we teach more than we do anywhere else in the school system. But at the same point in time, we need to demonstrate and make students understand the reason why we're doing things on the range. I've been at conferences and hear people say, I just let the students go out there and figure out and keep an eye on them. I sit there too. Man, I would be so upset if I just paid $6,000-$7,000 and I'm out here figuring it out on my own. So a couple things happen if you sit there and implement these things. The commentary driving, your first time pass rate, I promise you, will go up. The students will progress quicker and get through your system. And I think all of us are the same. The most cost-effective way we can get somebody through the system is the first time pass rate. If we sit here and use this and ask questions, direct our students, actually go ask them questions and direct them when they're doing pre-trips, make them think about what they're doing on the range, and then get them on the road and absolutely teach them every minute they're behind the wheel, your first time pass rate will skyrocket. But more importantly, once they get out there in the real world, they're going to be successful, and your quality will stand out. I promise you, your quality will stand out amongst other students. Bottom line, train drivers think, not just operate. I think I've said all this, but said it in different ways: awareness, better decisions, safer outcomes. Consistent commentary equals consistent quality. So there's no way about that, and you've got to get your instructors comfortable with that. And sometimes when you find out the resistance, because they don't know the defensive driving course very well themselves, again, go back to just getting them in a van or a vehicle other than a truck, and get everybody in there. And instructors are exactly like students. They observe and learn just like the students do. So you don't have to go out here. If I'm running a school and I'm very short on admin and I'm in the office all the time, carve out a couple of times a week to go spend an hour with them. You'll be surprised, if they expect you to come out there and observe consistently how different they're going to act because they don't know you're going to do it, and they're going to be ready. Your appearance out there, your follow-up drives behavior. And when you do this, you have got to work so much harder at finding what they're doing right than wrong, or they're not going to be as receptive. I think it was the term that'd be malicious compliance. You don't want malicious compliance. You want them fully engaged and excited. And you do that by catching them doing things right and recognizing that and recognizing it in front of the group. So, that's how you get, that professional instruction, that culture, and, that it's going to rub off on your students, and you're going to create professional drivers, regardless of what happens to them. If they go to X, Y, and Z truck driving school and they got a bad mentor, you know what? They're going to be educated enough to realize they have a bad mentor, and they're going to take care of themselves once they get there on their own. So I ran my soup coolers for 47 minutes now. Kind of drug out a subject that probably could have been covered a lot quicker. But, most important thing is that you got to have a process to stay engaged with your instructors. Again, that's why I always loved this system. When I was at Swift, I could manage 11 campuses just looking at a dashboard. And with us, the cool thing with going to work with Jason and the team here is that we were able to get a return on investment just in paper savings. So, we want to make the environment safer for drivers. We want to make it safer for our families out here. That's one of the things I've always been amazed with these guys here. When I first was working with them as they were a vendor with me, Jason Boudreaux, the founder of the company, the thing that impressed me from the very beginning is that he's truly got a burning desire to make the industry safer and better for everybody. And this whole platform speaks to that. Reasons we like to do these seminars, it's kind of a CDL PowerSuite commercial, but it's because we want to give back too. There's so many things that we do here just trying to make it better for your family and my family. So again, anything we can do to help, reach out to us. We got any questions, James?
We do indeed. We got one from Larry.
Indeed.
Yeah, we got one from Larry. What have you found that works better in shifting? Is it floating or double clutching?
Well, we've always had to do the double clutching, because they got to pass CDL test. That's kind of the crazy things about the CDL test. In the real world, if all of us on this phone call probably rewrote the CDL manual, they would probably wouldn't be so concerned about double clutching as long as they were able to progress. And, I think once you get to that point, Larry, and, if you got a student that's proficient at floating the gears and explain to them about that area where you engage the clutch, that they can just pop the top of that clutch, and, the examiner's not going to know if they're, actually engaging that clutch any at all or not. But we've always had to teach that because you got somebody a lot of times in states when we didn't have third party that had no idea about a truck, and they're just sitting there watching, and so we've always had to do that. Usually the ones who floated gears were more advanced anyway. They were either coming from a Class B truck or had drove a CDL. So with the students, where we were the most proficient at getting them to shift was teaching them things like the 400 split, progressive shifting, and we actually even had a scale. If you're at this 45 miles an hour, this many RPMs at this gear, you go in. And that seemed to get us so much quicker to a proficiency level than anything else. So as much as I'd hate to say it with a newbie student, if I'm still doing manuals, is the double clutching. But if you got a newbie, an experienced driver who's done the shifting before and can float proficiently, at least get them to at least tap that clutch and make it look like they're doing it, or they're going to get gigged on points. Hope that answers your question. Probably not the answer you wanted, but
yeah, we got another one from Sean. Do you have a recommendation or a course of action on starting up a private training company, and any classes I should take or certification I should pursue? You mentioned the instructor course that we're working on, Tim.
Yeah, and of course, I'm in the instructor course, and it's all dependent on what state you're in. First thing is do you a really good search on what state you're in and what the licensing requirements are. Some states are very simple. Some states have financial requirements where you can't have more than a 1-to-1 ratio, debt to equity ratio. You got some states like Tennessee where you're actually under the Board of Education. Then you got states like Virginia and Arizona where you're under the Department of Motor Vehicles. So find out who your licensing agency is first. That's the most important, because then you're going to be able to tell what your path is. Anything you can do, like our instructor course, to get to the point where you get the mindset of being an instructor. And again, develop lesson plans and look at the guidelines at the state. If you're licensed, usually they're very, very clear as to what's required in your catalog. You're going to have some states you're going to have to develop a catalog. So it really kind of depends what state you're in. But as far as getting proficient, as far as training your instructors and getting them well, something like our course, the instructor development course, would be ideal. And I kind of want to drop this in right now too, that James and myself and a few others are going to be working on developing some more instructor training modules. If there's anything you guys out there in the field see that there's not being addressed, that there's a need, because, our industry has really been kind of poor, some of the resources, but we're trying to come up and build a really more robust instructor training modules. So if you guys, let James know if there's any kind of issues or things that you'd like to see trained, covered in an instructor development program, let us know. Because, I think we can come up really good with just sitting here from our experience developing something. But, getting the voice of the customer helps a lot, because you as administrators of your schools or in leadership positions, what are you commonly seeing there's a gap in the training for instructors that maybe we can address and help you with? So if you got any ideas on that, let us know. We'd appreciate it. I feel like a politician. I think I answered that question, but didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And the instructor course, we're going to be filming that in the CDL yard that we are partnered with, our partner CDL school, with live students, live instructors. Tim's going to be in the video. It's going to be an awesome one. I think we have another. What's that, Tim?
I was going to answer a question. I remember somebody had sent some questions in before, and one of them was about attracting instructors. In my experience, is a little bit different than if you're a proprietary school or college, because I was always in direct competition for the fleet. So anytime we rose driver pay, it hurt me trying to attract instructors, because it was kind of like you were in a arms race for pay. But the things that we did find that worked for us, and that you guys might want to try if you haven't thought about this, is one, if you remember the students that did really, really well and they get 2-3 years down the line, go back in your rows and reach out to them. That was very successful for us at Swift. You would be amazed that we've got, language, retired, not there anymore. About half the academies at Swift are led by people right now that at one point in time were a student coming through our system. And a lot of our instructors there were former students, and we would just reach out. We'd say, we see James went for the school. It's been about 2.5-3 years now. And hey, James, man, just reaching out, letting you know, we'd love to have you, maybe be part of the team here if you ever got interested. that was very successful for us. So, go back and mind some of your students, graduates in the past. That was successful. The other thing that helped a lot is probably no surprise, it's social media, the LinkedIn. Do a lot of things on there, LinkedIn, and showing things that are happening with the team. Especially, there's a state college here that has an account, and it almost makes me want to go to school there, because every time you see them on LinkedIn or Facebook, that looks like the most fun place in the world to go to work. So that exposure on your social media, putting that out there, that's helped a lot with us at Swift. Those two things helped a lot. And I know the economy probably helped a little bit, but that helped us get up to staff and our instructor needs. Those two things helped remarkably compared to some of the other things we've done. So I just wanted to answer that question because, James, I think we had that prior to the meeting. Somebody asked that question about attracting instructors.
Yep, that's true.
So what else we got, brother?
We got one more. Have any of the schools ever school bus protocol stopping for the signs?
Do what now? What was the question again, James? I'm sorry.
Have any of the schools ever taught school bus protocol for the signs? That's what's written.
So that's, I don't know, everything I've ever been in, it's, the school bus has always been part of the hazard, perception and looking for the flashing lights and making sure that we've obeyed the law on that, almost to the point where it was always kind of drilled in as much as the railroad crossings, things of that nature. So, I know it's always been a part of the schools I've been part of, and I can't really say what individual schools. I've never seen it really detailed in lesson plans at a school or anything that I've reviewed, but it certainly was where we were at. It was kind of going to their hazard perceptions. Same thing as if you saw an individual, walking on the sidewalk or a car pulling out. That's just part of the environment and part of the commentary driving. And being aware that the school bus is going to stop at railroad tracks and things that much, and school hours. As most of the instructors say, you got to look for the babies. Almost every instructor calls that, says that. But but in that part, it's been always part of the hazard perception and part of being a professional driver, looking for those buses and being aware that they are going to stop and look for the telltale signs. In the mornings, it's not so hard because if you're scanning out far enough ahead, you'll see these kids standing waiting for the bus. So things like that we taught, and I'm quite sure a lot of the schools on this call do it as well. James?
And that was all the questions we had.
Well, either confused everybody or talked too much, one of the two. So, James, we had two questions before the meeting.
Yeah.
And I know one of them was about instructors, but I can't remember what the other one was. Forgive me.
Yeah.
Do you recall?
One question I had was about the curriculum. Is there a standard CDL curriculum we should use? Everything we do is in line with FMCSA and the DOT. And the last question is hiring more instructors to help program. We have so many students applying, but not enough instructors. Any ideas?
That was the social media, and then mining your past graduates and reaching out to them was what that question was. And on the curriculum, that's a very detailed entry level training is very detailed. And, all the other, you take where James is sitting in the state of Washington is actually crazy. And I love the fact that they're what they're trying to do, but I hate the way they dictate the hours. It doesn't give you the ability to adjust to certain student needs. So the thing that I would say that if you follow the entry level training and then made sure that you made a really good defensive driving course part of your culture, there'd be very few things that you could do to make a better rounded student. There's going to be things that you can sit there and teach that are not part of the actual driving skill. One of the things at Swift Transportation, one reason we were always so heavy into military veterans is because they know how to do the time management and they know how to handle homesickness because they've had to do it before. So many of these individuals. So here's the carrot I would throw out to that I saw in the past that would help. If you had something to kind of get these individuals a little more ready for, being time management on their part. And, there's certain things that we used to teach a class that when you go drive a truck, that it's not just you. This is a relationship between not only you, but the person that you love most, because it affects everybody. And, there's things that we used to do that, expectations are, if you expect these things to happen, then y'all need to sit down and agree while you're out on the road. This is going to happen. This is how it's going to happen. And just have a really good understanding that when you do this, whoever's important in your life is a partner in this as well. And sometimes you will find out the students that don't stay out here and do it very well. It's not because of them. It's because they were poorly planned their absence at home. There's certain things, if you're not at home and you're gone for a week, then whoever's important to you is having to make decisions. Then you need to talk about it. You need to talk about it and know if this happens, this is what needs to happen, and realize that you're not going to be there. And so it doesn't turn into conflict. I mean, we always used to joke, say, never come home tired, dirty, and hungry at the same time. Because believe it or not, the people at home have missed you and they're excited to see you. You don't want a tired, dirty, person showing up that's angry. So, be careful and realize that when, we would teach them that when you did get home, you were missed and people are looking forward to it. Don't come in as the Grinch. Time management. A lot of these people have been in an environment where they were told what to do every single minute of the day. And so if you've got any kind of mechanism to kind of prepare them for time management, that will help a lot. Because you'll see a lot of times, if you give them a good fundamental skill on all these things we're talking about, a good defensive driving course, all the requirements, the other two weak chinks in the armor is going to be time management and their, how they handle their personal life being absent from home. I mean, you could probably sit there and talk for days, but, if you're somebody's most important thing in the world to you and you're going out here on the truck, you need to be doing this as a team. Because if the person that's important to you is not happy with you being out here, and every time you talk, all you're hearing is negativity because you're not there, that driver's not going to stay out there very long. So all the requirements, absolutely. The two weaknesses that you see once you see a proficient, well-trained driver is time management and their personal life and how their family does without them being there. It has to be a commitment on both sides. And so they need to come to some agreements so that if they come home and somebody's done this, well, it's not a surprise. It's got something you agreed on. Now, a lot of that's gone nowadays with the advent of cell phones. But back in the day, when it cost a lot of money, it was hard to communicate. But there's a lot of that stuff. It's so much easier. And, you can see a lot of these younger drivers get all upset, worried about what somebody's doing at home. They got to understand that, it doesn't matter. People are going to do what they're going to do, whether you're 500 miles away or 2 miles away. So just that mindset of being away from home, which why we've always liked the military. They knew how to handle that. Uncle Sam taught them that, and this time management. I'm rambling, James.
Okay, we got a couple more questions before we end this. We got one from John. Have you experienced accidents? And if yes, what do you think could be done to prevent those?
Well, one of the things that we've always done, and yes, we've had accidents, Now, 90% of them, I hate to say it this way, but 90% of them is usually a car hitting the rear of our trailer because they weren't paying attention. But we've had accidents in the past where we've taken, a sign down or scraped a pole, nothing very serious. But we've had accidents on the range. And so one thing we've always done, we've done a really good accident report, documented the facts, got a lot of pictures. And then we kind of take back, and is what I used to call is like a driver improvement class. We go back and start looking at the events. As I said earlier, sometimes like these poles and these signs, it comes down to the point the instructor lost control of the truck 3 or 4 blocks down the road because he told the student to go up to the next sign and hang a right. And there was no communication, no talk about setting up. Instructor was distracted, bad setup. And when they started to turn, everything was bad. Well, the instructor lost, control of that truck. So we look back at that and say, hey, look, you got to get better. Here's where you messed up. Our philosophy was, regardless, the only time an instructor was not responsible is if they were on the range and the student just freaked out and we're trying to do everything we can to stop them and they're just on the accelerator, and doing crazy stuff. But our expectation was that it's always the instructor to always keep control. So once we did have an accident, we documented it very well. And then we approach it in a mindset to get better, never punishment. If it's a reoccurring thing, then it's probably some corrective action. But always approach the fact when something happens, and you got to get that culture where the instructors understand that it's all about getting better. It's not about trying to assess the blame. What can we do next time to make sure this doesn't happen? So we'd always go through an assessment. Sometimes in the past, we'd actually sit there and like our instructor huddles, would get up, document what happened on the whiteboard. Everybody would give their opportunity to say what we could have done better and what we could have done to improve on that situation. And you'd be surprised that once you get that culture where it's open and everybody's not feeling like you're just trying to hang the blame on somebody, you get some really honest discussions. And almost every single time, you get the individual involved in it, agree that he could have done something better or she could have done something better. That's the whole thing, is to approach it, know exactly what happened, where the failure began, and what we could do better. So my short answer would be is to cultivate a culture that we're going to get better, and we're not trying to blame people for stuff, and foster that.
And then this is a question from before the webinar started. I just finished training a new driver, and the driver is doing wonderful out on the road, making great decisions, scanning mirrors, checking the tail swing in the vehicle, building a good following distance, and being courteous to others around the vehicle. My challenge is how to enhance or refresh the skills of my team of experienced drivers.
No. So, that's kind of funny because it kind of bleeds into where we developed that from. We used to have what we call driver improvement. And we tracked a lot of things back in the beginning when it was with the MS carriers and we first opened the school. We had our own safety analyst, and there's a couple of surprising things that we found. One, that there was no correlation between scores and how the driver performed, except for one thing, and that was the pre-trip. If they did poorly on a pre-trip and struggled on the pre-trip, they were going to have service failures and accidents or incidents. And I guess that kind of self-fulfilling, because if you don't take a pre-trip serious, which is a safety function, then you're probably not going to take other safety things serious as well. And then we saw on the higher end, the ones who performed really, really well, or the ones that were going to get in serious crashes. The ones who struggled were usually low dollar amount, high frequency, dragging the trailer across something. They knew their skill level was low and they weren't overconfident. And so trying to get to the answer, one of the things that we found, that if we saw that they had X amount of incidents, and I'm talking about little small incidents, and we knew through the data back then that within 6 months they had a 90% chance of having a serious crash. and we would come in and we would start covering those instances in what we would call driver improvement class. And we would bring them in, and it would be the same process we use with instructors. Everybody go diagram the accident, what happened, and where, and what we could have done differently. And then, everybody chime in that way. And believe it or not, when we brought that in there, and I think it was a really cool thing. Usually we'd take them to lunch, and after lunch we would get out in a van and go do role playing drive, drills. We actually had like a 95% success rate in breaking that chain of events of those guys and ladies going out and having a serious crash. And I think the biggest thing where a lot of people don't realize, there's one guy who was in the class, just give you an example. He was in the class because he'd been hit like 2 times in a truck stop and he wasn't even in the truck. Well, when we get up and start diagramming and go for these incidents, because he's a newbie, guess what he had a habit of? Always parking on the end. And so he did not realize, it's not your fault. You're not charged with that, but you're making a bad decision because it's easy to get in and out. It's parking on the end of the lane. And that's where people were dragging their trailers across him. And once he saw that we're trying to help him be aware of something like that, he was so much more accepted and understood where we were trying to go with that. And again, if you see somebody's doing really, really well, but they're having a few little things, bring them in and discuss what could have done better or what we could do to improve that. Because what happens when you get out there 6-7 months, they start sometimes getting a little more overconfident, and you need to rein them in and have a little talk, especially if there had a couple little instances in the meantime.
And last question: what if students are not showing up consistently? We still want to get those things done and not just kick them out. What are the tips and tricks? That's from John.
Oh, so you're talking to somebody from a carrier school, so that's probably a bad question for me, because that's I've been to some of the schools and a lot of our customers, and I guess I was very fortunate in my career because we always told the students there's 2 things that are important. There's only 2 things important being a truck driver. One's being on time, and the other one's being safe. Now, there's a mile high of material to make those 2 things happen. So, I'm just going to be quite honest with you. I've never had to deal with that because we were very strict on that. But a lot of schools, and there's a school in Oklahoma I was in a few months ago, and these guys work around their jobs and float in and out. So, it's almost like an air traffic control tower, the students coming and going. So I've never had to experience that, but I do know that as long as you keep the students engaged and excited about learning, it is probably about the single most powerful motivator you can. And so, and that's one of the things I just always kind of loved about our system. And we saw it at Swift. When you sit there and we went to CDL PowerSuites, and not only did the instructor have a portal, but so the administrator, but the students did. And that portal, them being able to see their progress and to see their instructors' comments, seemed to keep them more engaged and excited about completing their training. So, maybe that just keeping them excited and sharing information, things of that nature, and making it fun for them to be there and get out. Because if you do this right and you work just as hard about catching them doing things right, it becomes fun. The students I've seen that did the best in our programs are the ones that every time they got out of the truck had a smile on their face. So make it fun. Make it somewhere they want to be instead of somewhere they have to be. Make sure you don't have instructors that are hollering at them or, the only thing they do is tell them what's wrong. You wouldn't want to show up to work like that every day. So make it an environment, make it a culture of inclusion and welcoming. Make it fun to be there is the only thing I can tell you that I would suggest. And I will preface that by, me running carrier schools. We never had that problem because we were too strict on it. And I understand that a lot of proprietary schools and community college, it's a different world. You guys are working with students that are working and trying to go job and do a career. So you guys have to be a lot more flexible. So make the culture so that the student wants to be there. And, if you're doing everything you can and the student's engaged and they're really happy to be there, then that's probably all you can do.
That was all the questions.
Well, guys, again, really appreciate you taking your time to do this. And we're just wanting to share information with everybody. And again, anything you come up with, you want to see addressed as far as instructor training, things that gaps in training or things that we can do to make your instructor's life better, let us know. And we'll certainly put that in the bucket of things we're looking at to do. And as always, and here comes the CDL PowerSuite commercial. I'm not like the guy that bought the Men's Warehouse. I didn't buy the company, but I was so impressed with it after I retired, I came to work here. So that should tell you a lot. Anything you think we can do, if you got any gaps in your systems, if you want to be able to, and there's one individual, he's not here, he's at the trucking conference, Mid-America Truck Show, but he sent me an email this morning to make sure we recorded this. But, last time I saw him at one of his campuses and, he said, it is so nice to be able to sit there and not have to worry about passing an audit anywhere, and that's a powerful statement. And this is somebody who runs multiple campuses. So if you guys think you need any help, if you want to do better and have your life back, is like one individual when I first came here in a meeting said that, the system gave him his life back. Reach out to us, man. We'd love to have you be part of the family because we don't have customers here. We have partners and great bunch. James, get me out of here.
And that concludes our webinar. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Please email us at info@CDL PowerSuite or tim@CDL PowerSuite. If you have any more questions, thank you so much for joining.
Absolutely.
And that concludes our webinar. Everyone.